Good morning. This is Jerry Volesky. I'm the Range and Forage Specialist here at the West Central Research and Extension Center in North Platte. And today we're going to be talking about drought, and the UNL Beef website has had now a series of drought-related webinars covering different topics. Today I'm going to be talking about grazing and forages here in the midst of drought. Today's presentation, as far as an overview, these are some of the topics that I will cover. Talk a little bit about the current conditions, where we're at as far as range and pasture production, a little bit also on what the plant and grass response is to drought, then also forage quality, and then a little bit about grazing strategies during drought, and then some alternative forage options that some people might have the opportunity to consider. Well, of course, here in early July, looking at the High Plains Drought Monitor, we can pretty much see all of Nebraska, as well as affected by some varying level or degree of drought. And I'm one that likes to look at forecasts too, just to see what the probabilities might be for 1 to 2 to 3 months into the future. And things do not look good. The top figure here giving the temperature probability for the next 3 months, July through September, shows and above, the probability is above that we would have higher than normal temperatures. And the precipitation showing equal chances, or EC, for having above or below normal precipitation. So overall, though, I think a pretty good bet, hot, and it's likely going to be dry as well for the extended future. Now, I made some travels across the state here the last couple of 2-3 weeks, and basically no matter which of these counties I was in, pasture and range conditions for late June do not look very good. Things obviously are quite brown and quite dry. You know, in all the locations, though, that I did visit, it was surprising to see that there is a hint of green coming from the warm season grasses yet. And cool season grasses, which were early this year, you know, they did make some growth. And many locations, particularly in the sandhills, there was at least average precip in April and even back into March, but it was really May 1st that things really shut down as far as the precipitation goes. And so, you know, we did have fair cool season grass production, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. Now, overall, when we look at rangeland herbage or forage production, we've got some pretty good data here showing from our UNL Barter Brothers Ranch in southern Brown and Rock counties, and this goes back to 1999, and it's just the average annual production. And we see, on average, over that 12-year period or so, we produce just under 1,800 pounds per acre of forage. Well, of course, we have some pretty significant year-to-year variation, from a low of 880 one year, and that would have been in 2002. The scale is off a little bit on that x-axis, that being a drought year, 2002, and then up to 2,630 pounds per acre just a couple of years ago in 2009. And of course, the last few years, 4 years at least, we've had some really good production that went along with our abundant rainfall we've had in most areas. And one other thing, this is the same production graph on the left, the herbage production, and then on the right is the May, June, and July precipitation. And we found that we do have the greatest correlation when we look at the total precip for those 3 months with the production of grass that we'll have in a given growing season. Well, here we are into July, and so we're, of course, well below normal with our May and June precip so far, and that's certainly going to affect what we might see in terms of production. I do have some new data here that I think is quite interesting, and this comes from our Goodmanson Sandhills laboratory up by Whitman, Nebraska. And each year we've been collecting production data on upland range, and we've got this going back to 2007. But we sampled a yield either in mid-June, or I should say both in mid-June and then again in mid to late August. Now, in mid to late August, we call that the peak standing crop or the peak yield, because for the most part, it's late August and you're going to have accumulated pretty much all the growth you are for that season. Well, here I'm showing the mid-June data and then the peak yield here on the column on the right in blue. But here in 2012, it was kind of interesting to see we had, a fairly good cool season grass production up to mid-June. This is about the 20th of June, 454 pounds per acre. But what was surprising was the warm season grass production by mid-June, over 668 pounds, which if you look at some of the previous years, that was quite a bit higher. And with that, of course, probably best explained by the early spring we had, just the above normal temperatures in March and April, and May as well. You look at the total, 1,300, a little over 1,300 pounds per acre. That's not that much different than some of the previous years. But here's the key thing. Where is it going to be in August? It's likely that we're going to have pretty much not much additional growth and pretty much basically be the same or finish the season of production with, somewhere in that 1,300 to 1,400 pounds per acre, which is markedly less than some of the previous years. And of course, the other key point with this, and we do use this in our drought planning or as a critical date, if you will, a lot of times by mid-June, you have half the total production in your pastures that you would be expecting for that year. But of course, we're in this drought situation, so that's just not going to happen this year. Some of the other things, of course, with drought, of course, the number one thing is we just don't have that forage produced. But then the other consideration is the forage quality. Now, one of the things that a lot of ranchers have going for them this year is that because in the previous 3 years or even 4 years we've had above normal rainfall, good grass production, but last year in particular, we have, and most people have an abundance of carryover or at least some previous year's grass in their pastures. Photo here, you can see the new growth scattered throughout, but then a fair amount of the old previous year's residual. Well, a problem with that previous year's residual, it does provide some fill, but the quality, of course, is quite low. And we've also got some good data here looking at diet quality on upland sandhills range. And this comes from, again, our Goodmanson Sandhills laboratory. But a lot of data has gone into this average, and it pretty much shows the typical trend in crude protein content going from May through or well into October. And as we see, quality of diets is highest in May and early June there when the plants are more vegetative and younger in growth. And as they mature, by the time we get to October, we see a substantial decline in quality. Well, back in the drought of 2002, one of the things that we saw up to June 7th, diet quality was still pretty good, but shortly after that, we're seeing a much quicker decline in the quality of those diets. So, of course, this has some issues or concerns for us when it comes to keeping a closer eye on the condition of our cows. Does have implications, of course, too, with breeding, particularly if we have, or if you have a practice of later calving, say April and May. We're probably getting close or getting very close to the breeding season for those cows now. That the quality of forage that they have available to them would certainly be of a concern. And then we do have a sample here collected in June 7th for 2012 and showing already, compared to the average, of what we normally expect at that date, lower crude protein content. And again, that could be in part because of cattle, well, first of all, being just the earlier maturity we're seeing on these grasses, as well as those cattle having to consume some of that previous year's growth as well. Now, a little bit about the plant and grassland response to drought. Well, of course, no rain equals reduced above ground production. But something else that's very important that we often don't think too much about is what's happening to root growth, and that's very important in terms of allowing those plants to make whatever growth possible with limited moisture, but also has implications as far as the overall vigor and health of those grasses for the following years after drought. Some other common observations, with drought, we do see fewer reproductive tillers or seed heads on our plants, grasses. There's just not enough moisture for them to afford that luxury of producing reproductive tillers. And so most of those plants will stay younger or smaller or vegetative in stage, but that doesn't necessarily mean that quality in the little bit of growth that we did have is going to remain high. As those plants age, even though they still may be vegetative, as those tillers become more, or go through time with age, they will lose some of that quality. And of course, depending on the severity of drought, we can have summer dormancy of both not only the cool season grasses, but the warm season grasses as well. Something else that's very important with drought and the grassland response is that it could affect us next year with respect to the formation of new buds. And these buds are really what's responsible for next and future years' tillers or grass shoots. Most of the reproduction of our rangeland grasses is vegetative. In other words, these grasses have and produce underground rhizomes, and from those rhizomes there are buds that are located, and these buds eventually develop and form new tillers to propagate those perennial grasses. Some other things, as we go into drought or in drought, we do know that our better condition range will recover quicker than if we have lower or poor condition type of rangelands. A lot of times, both during the drought and then in the year after a drought, we do see big increases in some of these annual weedy species, such as those shown here. Okay. A little bit about the grazing strategies during drought. And my first statement here is that overgrazing or heavier grazing than planned is usually inevitable with drought. And I think for it's just going to happen no matter how careful we are. And again, depending on the severity and the timing of the destocking that might be necessary, more often than not, we do end up with heavier grazing than we certainly had planned. But a key point here is keeping this to a minimum. That's going to benefit us in the future as far as the sustainability of those rangelands. And really what it gets down to, we've got the drought stress on those grasses now, and if we apply excessive or too heavy a defoliation, that really basically doubles the negative plant response that we're going to see. Also, of course, with the drought conditions, the key thing being to using the appropriate stocking rate or doing whatever is necessary to reduce those grazing pressure on the pastures. This graph here shows some of the long-term stocking rates. And when we are talking about stocking rates, we're really basing it on herbage production. And so This is again from the Barter Brothers Ranch, but I took those annual herbage productions, and of course it has that variability from year to year, but I superimposed on there what should have been the appropriate stocking rate based on that herbage production, and you can see that it really bounces from year to year. Whereas in the red line, that would be the average production that we would expect to have, 0.75 AUMs per acre. So trying to manage that can be difficult, and particularly during these drought years. One of the things that's very important to know, too, is that particularly for warm season grasses, July is a very critical month. And the reason that being is that during July, those grasses, those warm seasons, are trying to do their rapid growth. Of course, this year they're limited by just how much growth they can be doing, but because of the dry conditions. But we do know from previous research that if we are excessively grazing those warm season grasses during that midsummer period here, we can certainly be causing them some reductions in vigor. And so, of course, a key thing, as I point out here, July is a critical month during this drought year. And so doing what we can in terms of adjusting the stocking rates, now that can, of course, be either the time they spend in a pasture or the animal numbers. It's really just all about balancing the supply of forage that we've got out there with demand. What about pasture rotations? Many people do practice some type of rotational grazing. And generally with rotational grazing, particularly the more intensive rotations, a common principle is to slow down that rotation when the growth rate of those grasses has slowed. Well, and of course we're certainly having very slow, if not no growth rate whatsoever. But still, I think sometimes we do have to be watching that closely, and in many cases, if we are in a rotation, we're actually almost speeding up that rotation just because of the fact that if we did not reduce animal numbers, we're going to be running out of grass in those pastures much sooner. And so that does result in the rotation moving faster. Now, a few more things related to grazing and our drought. And I pose this question here: what if there are substantial rains in July? Well, I think that there is some potential yet if we did have some rain here in the month of July, and it would have to be a significant amount, greater than 1 or 2 inches, and then actually almost getting into a rainy pattern. But those warm season grasses do have some time or potential yet for growth if some rains were to occur. And then the cautionary point that I would like to make is that if we do see a sudden flush of growth, is to be very careful with our grazing of that new growth. Again, we have to remember that these grasses are undergoing some drought stress, and some initial growth after a rain really should be dedicated or allocating to try to let those grasses recover a little bit. Once we get into late summer and fall, of course, I think we can be a little bit less caution is needed, if you will. At that point, we can really simply be out there harvesting that forage to a reasonable level. I might also point out, too, we're not quite there yet. We're close, but even those warm season grasses could get to the point where they do have summer dormancy because of the drought conditions. One other thing to mention or point out in our grazing is that typically we do have the potential for poisonous plant poisoning, especially during drought. Overall in Nebraska, poisonous plants are not too much of a problem. We do have an occasional incidences or cases of plant poisoning, but this is increased during drought, and just a couple of weeks ago I did have a case or example that I did look at. This was a sandy type pasture. It was dominated by more cool season grasses, which in mid-June were fully mature and brown, but this individual had an area of choke cherries growing on the side of the hill. This is maybe a quarter to a half acre size thickets of choke cherries, and we went in there and we really noticed that those cattle in that pasture had heavily utilized that area. They were browsing those green choke cherry twigs and leaves, and as a result had some death loss that was likely attributed to those choke cherries. So just another precautionary thing to keep in mind. Watch out for poisonous plants that you might have in your pastures, particularly if they are green. Hay production this year, well, we're likely going to see, I've talked with some producers, and they've indicated maybe their yields of the meadows down 25 to even 50%. Likely to see more acres cut, though, because of the drier conditions and allowing the equipment to get into some of those normally more wet areas. Likely that the quality of some of the hay this year will be down compared to previous years. A lot of that, though, will have to do on the timing of the cutting. If they were a little bit early, of course the grass growth was early, so if they were out haying a bit earlier than they normally do, that should help the quality somewhat. A few things on emergency and alternative forages. I've talked with a number of people this year that had irrigated wheat, and certainly they were looking at different options there as far as interseeding something into that wheat stubble to produce some forage. The primary recommendation would be some of the warm season annuals. And I would think the ones I've got circled here in red, the millet, whether it be the pearl millet or the foxtail millets, the sorghum Sudan grass hybrids, straight Sudan grass, or your sorghum or cane types, would probably be your best bet here this summer. There are a few others that have some possibility, but I think this summer is probably not the time to be trying anything new, but using some of these tried and true standbys here. Later on into the summer, we could be thinking about some options for the fall. Here, things like the oats, turnips, or other spring cereal grains do work quite well, as well as things like the traditional winter annuals of winter wheat, rye, or triticale. Planting on those, the oats type of in brassicas and turnips, late July through August works quite well. Wanted to show here just a couple of scenarios that or strategies that could be tried. First one here, into that wheat stubble, trying to get the most out of it as one can, or most out of those acres, but foxtail millet planted into that wheat stubble right now here in early July. That would be normally a 50 to 60 day crop, and so it will be hayed off in early September. And I think yet that's not too late to consider planting a second crop like oats, triticale, rye, turnips, or possibly even mixtures of these for a fall forage. So getting the most out of that resource is possible. Another possibility into that wheat stubble could be one of the other warm season annuals, the Sudan, sorghum Sudan hybrids, or pearl millet, and that could be grazed or hayed into the fall. Likewise, I've visited with some people about their soybeans or corn silage ground. One of the things we know that those crops are going to be earlier this year than normal as well, and so that could buy us a little extra time, say, for example, after soybean harvest, to come in with some oats, rye, triticale, and so on. Now, we've just gone through about 8 or 9 months in a row of higher than normal temperatures, and so who's to say that above average temperature pattern's not going to is going to change, and so it might carry or continue on into the fall, and so that might give us a little bit of extra growing season on the backside. You know, here's one other unusual thought or approach that I've got a couple of people that are going to be trying, but they have some irrigated cool season perennial grasses. So this would be things like your orchard grass, brome, intermediate wheatgrass. We know many times during the summer, and especially this summer with the heat, those cool season grasses under irrigation aren't growing. They're just, they may remain green a little bit, but they just won't have the growth. And so the idea here is to, right now here in early July, plant some foxtail millet. And I think it would have a pretty good chance if that foxtail millet can get started, get up 6-8 inches, it should be well on its way in that grass sod to produce a fair hay crop in early September. Just a few other points on those annual forages. Those warm season annuals, we've done trials where we've planted them up to August 1st, and that has still resulted in some pretty good yields. Those cool seasons, that'd be the rye, or excuse me, the oats, turnips, and those types of things. Typically, August 1st to September 15th is the planting window there. The later you get into September, though, with the things like the oats, the less production you'll likely realize. What about dryland? Any opportunities with dryland crop ground this year and growing some forage? And of course, there's two different approaches. You know, planting and wait for the rain, or wait for the rain and plant. I think the risk certainly there with planting first is probably too high. I think if you do have a little bit of crop ground that you could plant some forage on, it would be best to wait for some rain, first rains to build up a little soil moisture, and then watching the forecast closely to see if after you do plant that you could have a chance of getting some additional rain to get that forage up and growing. Dryland corn, I've got a photo here inset from a couple of weeks ago showing some dryland corn. Then also the larger photo here is from 2002 in August. And salvaging dryland corn, of course, a big issue with that can be the concentrations of nitrates. Oftentimes, an ideal way to harvest this or salvage this dryland corn is by silaging it, cutting and silaging. But a key thing there is getting it at the right moisture to make proper silage or green chop. That will alleviate some of the nitrate problems associated with dryland corn. But the other issue this year is just how much it will growth it'll attain before it'll completely stop growing and start to turn brown. It's a lot shorter this year than it was in 2002 before it completely turned brown and plants actually starting to die. So again, with the dryland corn, the nitrates certainly can be an issue, and that must be kept in mind if we're thinking about trying to salvage those. The other thing, and it's related to the nitrates in dryland corn, I think a lot of farmers may have been bumping up their their nitrogen fertilizer rates this year because they've done fairly well with dryland corn the last few years, and that higher level of nitrogen fertilizer will certainly increase that nitrate accumulation risk as well. Lastly, I think when it comes to our forages, something very important, we do stress to be doing this every year, is some forage testing. Again, whether it be the nitrates, but just other hays that we may have produced. There probably is going to be a lot of purchased hay for some people this year, and getting some forage tests done on that, I think, very important here. It can certainly help us better formulate balanced rations, of course, but certainly prevent over or underfeeding of certain nutrients. And of course, that hay is going to be very expensive. And so with that, that would be wrapping up this webinar. I do have my contact information there should you have more questions. And again, these webinars are related to drought. They can be found and are archived and stored, this one as well as other ones, on the beef.unl.edu website. So thank you and have a good day.